Welcome to my Fall Asleep channel. Today I will tell you about Antidepressants, a calm narrative with interesting facts. If you enjoy peaceful stories like this, you are warmly invited to subscribe and return whenever you need to slow down. Now allow yourself to get comfortable, let the day fade away, and enjoy quiet and pleasant rest. Let's begin. Antidepressants exist within a much wider story about how the human brain regulates mood, emotion, and inner balance over long periods of time. They are not sudden solutions and not dramatic interventions. They are medications developed to interact gently with systems that already operate continuously beneath awareness. Inside the brain, billions of neurons communicate through chemical signals, passing messages across tiny spaces, shaping how experiences are processed and how emotional states rise, persist, or gradually release. Antidepressants influence this communication by affecting neurotransmitters such as serotonin, norepinephrine, and in some cases, dopamine. They do not introduce new emotions into the brain, and they do not remove the capacity to feel. Instead, they adjust the conditions under which emotions are regulated, allowing signaling systems to function with less strain over time. One of the most common questions surrounding antidepressants is simple yet important. What are they actually meant to do? The answer begins by setting aside a familiar misconception. Antidepressants are not designed to make someone happy. They do not manufacture pleasure, excitement, or contentment. The phrase happy pills suggests an artificial emotional state, but antidepressants do not work in that way. Happiness is not something they create, and sadness is not something they erase. Rather, they may reduce the intensity or persistence of certain emotional signals, creating space for the brain's natural regulatory processes to regain balance. Another question often follows quietly behind this one. Do antidepressants cure depression? The answer is more measured than many expect. Antidepressants do not cure conditions in the way a treatment removes an infection. They help manage symptoms by influencing the chemical environment in which emotions are generated and maintained. The brain itself remains adaptive throughout this process, constantly adjusting to internal states and external conditions. Antidepressants work within this adaptability, not against it. Concerns about addiction appear frequently in conversations about these medications. Most antidepressants are not addictive in the sense of producing cravings or compulsive use. They do not stimulate reward pathways in the way addictive substances do. However, because the brain adapts to their presence, stopping them suddenly can lead to discomfort, not because of addiction, but because signaling systems need time to recalibrate. This distinction is often misunderstood. Another common concern is whether antidepressants change who a person is. They do not replace personality, values, or identity. What they may change is how strongly certain emotional signals dominate awareness. When persistent emotional pressure softens, behavior may shift naturally, not because the person has changed, but because the internal environment has changed. Questions about timing also arise. How long do antidepressants take to work? Unlike medications that act immediately, antidepressants usually take weeks before noticeable effects appear. This gradual timeline reflects how the brain adjusts. Receptor sensitivity shifts slowly. Communication pathways reorganize over time. Expectations of instant change often conflict with this biological reality. People also wonder who antidepressants are meant for. They are not reserved only for severe experiences, nor are they universally appropriate. Their use depends on individual biology, context, and clinical judgment. Emotional regulation does not follow simple categories, and neither does response to medication. Sleep frequently becomes part of the discussion. Some antidepressants influence sleep patterns, sometimes increasing alertness, sometimes supporting rest, depending on how they interact with neurotransmitters involved in the sleep-wake cycle. They are not sedatives, and they do not work by shutting the brain down. Motivation is another area of curiosity. Some people worry that antidepressants reduce drive or ambition, while others fear increased restlessness. Both experiences are possible, depending on individual response. This variability highlights an essential point. Antidepressants do not work the same way for everyone. Each brain responds according to its own chemistry and history. Another widespread myth suggests that antidepressants permanently change the brain. While they influence signaling while present, there is no evidence that they permanently rewire the brain in a fixed way. The brain remains plastic, capable of adjustment when conditions change. People also ask whether antidepressants affect memory or focus. Some notice changes, others do not, and experiences vary widely. Antidepressants are sometimes confused with anti-anxiety medications or sedatives, yet they are not the same category and do not work by numbing the nervous system. Another misconception is that antidepressants suppress all emotions. While some individuals experience emotional blunting, this is not universal, and the intended effect is balance rather than elimination. Emotions continue to exist, but their extremes may become less dominant. There is also the belief that once antidepressants are started, they must be taken forever. In reality, many people discontinue them over time, allowing the brain to adjust gradually. Another assumption is that antidepressants fix life problems. They do not change circumstances, relationships, or external stressors. They influence internal signaling, which may alter how those circumstances are experienced. Antidepressants do not work by force or override. Their effects are subtle, working through modulation rather than control. They shift probabilities, not absolutes. And this quieter understanding opens the way to a more accurate view of how these medications fit into modern discussions of mental health. Not as simple answers and not as threats, but as tools that interact patiently with complex biological systems. Over time, the antidepressants has unfolded alongside changes in how societies understand the mind itself. Early approaches to mood and emotion were often shaped by philosophy or moral judgment. Long before the language of neuroscience existed, sadness, anxiety, and emotional withdrawal were interpreted through culture, belief, and circumstance, rather than through biology. It was only in the middle of the 20th century that researchers began to notice something unexpected. Certain medications, developed for entirely different purposes, seemed to influence mood and emotional stability in ways that could not be explained by sedation or stimulation alone. These observations did not arrive as clear answers, but as quiet anomalies that invited further study. From this period emerged the first antidepressants, not as precise tools, but as discoveries that hinted at deeper chemical processes within the brain. As research continued, attention turned toward neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers that allow neurons to communicate. Serotonin, norepinephrine, and later dopamine became central to this investigation, not because they explained everything, but because they were consistently involved in mood regulation and emotional signaling. Antidepressants were gradually understood as agents that influenced how long these neurotransmitters remained active in the synapse, subtly altering communication patterns rather than forcing new ones. This led to another common question. Do antidepressants simply increase serotonin? The answer is more layered than that. While some classes, such as SSRIs, primarily affect serotonin signaling, the brain itself responds through complex feedback loops, adjusting receptor sensitivity and network behavior over time. The result is not a simple increase, but a gradual recalibration of signaling balance. As understanding grew, so did public conversation, and with it, new assumptions and concerns. One persistent idea was that antidepressants represent a purely modern invention, disconnected from natural human functioning. Yet the systems they interact with are ancient, shaped by evolution long before medication existed. Antidepressants do not introduce foreign processes. They interact with mechanisms that already regulate stress, adaptation, and recovery. Another question often raised is whether antidepressants are the same as anti-anxiety medications. While there is overlap in how they may be used, they are not identical in purpose or mechanism. Some antidepressants influence anxiety because mood and anxiety share overlapping neural pathways, but they do not work by simply suppressing nervous system activity. This distinction matters for understanding why their effects can feel subtle and gradual rather than immediate. People also ask whether antidepressants affect thinking, creativity, or emotional depth. Experiences here vary. Some individuals report feeling mentally clearer as emotional noise decreases, while others notice changes in how intensely emotions are experienced. These differences reflect individual neurobiology rather than a uniform effect of the medication itself. The idea that antidepressants make people emotionally numb has become a common narrative, yet it does not capture the full picture. Emotional blunting can occur for some, but it is not the intended outcome, nor is it universal. The goal of these medications is not to remove feeling, but to reduce extremes that overwhelm regulation. Another widely discussed topic is the role of dopamine in antidepressant action. While dopamine is not the primary target of many antidepressants, it often becomes involved indirectly. Changes in serotonin and norepinephrine signaling can influence motivation, attention, and reward processing, areas where dopamine plays a central role. This is why some people notice changes in drive or focus, even when dopamine is not directly targeted. Questions about long-term use often arise at this point in the conversation. Is it safe to take antidepressants for many years? The prevailing understanding is that long-term use can be appropriate for some individuals, provided it is monitored and regularly evaluated. Long-term use does not imply dependency or failure, but rather reflects ongoing interaction between biology and circumstance. Equally important is the question of discontinuation. The idea that antidepressants cannot be stopped once started is another misconception. Many people discontinue them successfully, allowing the brain to gradually readjust its signaling patterns over time. The emphasis here is on gradual change, not abrupt shifts. Another concern that often appears is whether antidepressants suppress negative thoughts directly. They do not remove thoughts from the mind. Rather, by altering emotional intensity, they may reduce how strongly certain thoughts dominate attention. Cognition and emotion remain interconnected but not controlled. Antidepressants are also sometimes misunderstood as solutions that work alone. In reality, they are often one element within a broader context that includes environment, support, time, and personal meaning. They do not replace these factors, nor do they eliminate the influence of life circumstances. This leads to another frequent myth, that antidepressants fix life problems. They do not change external reality. They influence internal signaling, which may alter how challenges are perceived and managed. This distinction helps clarify their role without overstating their power. The story of antidepressants continues to evolve as research deepens and perspectives shift. New questions emerge, not because old ones were wrong, but because understanding has expanded. The brain remains one of the most complex systems studied, and antidepressants represent one way of interacting with that complexity, not through force, not through certainty, but through gradual modulation. allowing space for regulation to reassert itself over time. And as this perspective settles, the conversation moves forward, away from extremes of expectation or fear, toward a more balanced view of what these medications are, how they work, and where their limits naturally reside. As understanding has broadened, another layer of discussion has quietly taken shape around antidepressants, one that focuses less on what they are and more on how they are perceived. Perception plays a powerful role in shaping expectations, and expectations often shape experience. When antidepressants are framed as dramatic fixes or irreversible choices, they tend to carry unnecessary weight. When they are framed as neutral tools interacting with biology, they become easier to understand without fear or idealization. One of the most persistent questions in this space is whether antidepressants work the same for everyone. The answer remains consistent. They do not. Each brain carries its own history of signaling patterns, receptor sensitivities, stress exposure, and adaptation. Because of this, two people can take the same medication and report very different experiences. This variability is not a flaw in the medication, but a reflection of biological diversity. Another common question centers on whether antidepressants influence emotional range. Some people notice that emotional highs and lows feel less extreme, while others feel little change in emotional depth. This difference often reflects how intense emotional signaling was before treatment began. Reducing extremes does not mean removing emotion. It often means allowing emotion to pass without becoming overwhelming. The idea that antidepressants suppress authenticity often arises from misunderstanding this shift. Authenticity does not disappear when emotional intensity changes. It adapts, just as emotional expression adapts across different life stages and circumstances. Attention and focus are also part of the conversation. Some individuals notice improved clarity as emotional noise softens, while others experience temporary changes in concentration. These effects are not uniform and tend to shift over time as signaling systems adjust. Another question that appears frequently is whether antidepressants alter creativity. There is no single answer here. Creativity emerges from many interacting systems, including motivation, emotional range, and cognitive flexibility. For some, reduced emotional overload supports creative focus. For others, changes feel different. Again, individual context matters. Myths often persist where nuance is harder to communicate. One such myth is that antidepressants permanently change brain chemistry in a way that cannot be reversed. Current understanding does not support this idea. While antidepressants influence neurotransmitter signaling during use, the brain remains capable of adjusting when conditions change. Neural plasticity continues throughout life, allowing patterns to reorganize gradually. Another misconception suggests that antidepressants are simply chemical shortcuts. This framing overlooks the fact that they work slowly, subtly, and in cooperation with existing systems. Shortcuts bypass processes. Antidepressants engage them. People also ask whether antidepressants stop negative thoughts directly. They do not remove thoughts or prevent thinking. Instead, by altering emotional intensity, they may reduce how strongly certain thoughts command attention. The relationship between thought and emotion remains intact, but the balance may shift. Questions about anxiety often arise here as well. While antidepressants are not the same as anti-anxiety medications, some influence anxiety because mood and anxiety share overlapping neural pathways. They do not work by shutting down the nervous system, but by altering how signals are regulated over time. Another concern relates to emotional dependence, the fear that relying on medication means losing personal agency. This fear often comes from misunderstanding regulation as reliance. The brain relies on countless regulatory systems continuously. Medications interact with some of those systems temporarily. Agency remains in how life is lived, not in whether chemistry is influenced. Long-term use sometimes raises questions about safety and identity. For many, long-term use reflects stability rather than stagnation. For others, change becomes appropriate as circumstances shift. Neither path defines success or failure. Both reflect adaptation. Another widely held belief is that antidepressants eliminate the need for other forms of support or change. In reality, they do not replace environment, relationships, meaning, or time. They influence internal conditions, which may make engagement with those factors easier or clearer. This distinction allows antidepressants to be seen without exaggeration, neither as solutions nor as threats, but as part of a broader landscape of understanding how human emotional systems operate. As research continues, new questions replace older ones, not because answers were wrong, but because the picture has grown larger. Antidepressants remain one chapter in an ongoing story about the brain, a story shaped by biology, context, and evolving knowledge. And with this wider view, the conversation naturally moves toward integration rather than judgment, toward understanding rather than simplification, allowing space for complexity without the need to resolve it immediately. With that sense of integration, the conversation around antidepressants begins to settle into a more grounded perspective, one that allows complexity without demanding certainty. Another question often surfaces at this stage, quieter than the rest, yet persistent. Do antidepressants work alone, or do they require something else to be effective? The answer is neither simple nor dismissive. Antidepressants do not operate in isolation from life itself. They interact with sleep, stress, routine, relationships, and meaning because all of these shape the brain's chemical environment. They do not replace these factors, and they do not override them. Instead, they alter internal signaling in ways that may change how these factors are experienced. This is why two people in different circumstances can respond differently to the same medication. Environment and biology remain in constant conversation. Another closely related question is whether antidepressants can stop negative thoughts entirely. They do not remove thoughts from the mind, nor do they prevent difficult ideas from arising. Thoughts continue to appear as they always have. What may change is how strongly certain thoughts hold attention, how quickly they pass, and how much emotional weight they carry. This shift reflects changes in emotional signaling rather than cognitive control. Dopamine sometimes enters the discussion again here, particularly when motivation and engagement are considered. While many antidepressants focus primarily on serotonin or norepinephrine, changes in these systems can influence motivation and reward indirectly. This may explain why some individuals notice changes in drive, curiosity, or focus over time, not as a direct effect, but as part of a broader recalibration of signaling networks. Questions about emotional resilience often follow. Do antidepressants make people stronger or weaker? Neither framing fully captures their role. They do not create resilience, nor do they remove it. Resilience emerges from how the brain adapts to stress and recovery over time. Antidepressants may reduce persistent strain on regulatory systems, allowing resilience to re-emerge rather than be overwhelmed. Another myth that continues to circulate is that antidepressants suppress all emotional depth. This idea often arises from confusing emotional intensity with emotional richness. Reducing extremes does not eliminate complexity. It may allow more subtle emotional states to be noticed, states that were previously overshadowed by stronger signals. Long-term use brings its own set of questions. Some people wonder whether staying on antidepressants for many years means something has gone wrong. In reality, duration reflects individual context rather than outcome. Some nervous systems benefit from sustained support, others adapt and move on. Neither path represents failure or success. Both represent response to changing conditions. Another concern involves stopping antidepressants, the fear that stopping means returning immediately to previous states. While transitions can be uncomfortable if rushed, gradual change allows signaling systems to adjust. This process reflects the brain's capacity for adaptation rather than dependence. People also ask whether antidepressants dull ambition or creativity over time. Again, experiences vary. Ambition and creativity draw from many sources, including emotional energy, cognitive flexibility, and meaning. Changes in one system may shift how these qualities express themselves, but they do not remove them outright. Another widespread assumption is that antidepressants simplify emotional life. In reality, they often reveal complexity that was previously masked by persistent intensity. When emotional pressure eases, nuance becomes easier to notice. Smaller shifts, quieter preferences, subtler motivations come into view. This can feel unfamiliar at first, but it reflects regulation rather than loss. Public discussion often struggles with this nuance, preferring clear narratives of harm or benefit. Yet antidepressants resist simple classification. They are not universally helpful, nor inherently harmful. They are context-dependent tools interacting with living systems. This interaction continues to be studied, revised, and better understood over time. Science itself evolves, replacing certainty with probability and refinement. The understanding of antidepressants today is already different from what it was decades ago, and it will continue to change. This ongoing revision is not a weakness, but a strength of inquiry. It allows room for correction, expansion, and humility. As the conversation reaches this point, it becomes less about answering every question and more about recognizing the limits of simple answers. Antidepressants occupy a space where biology, experience, and interpretation overlap. Acknowledging this overlap allows discussion to remain open rather than polarized. And within that openness, understanding can continue to deepen, not through final conclusions, but through steady attention to how complex systems actually behave over time. As this broader understanding settles, attention turns naturally toward how antidepressants fit into everyday life, not as isolated interventions, but as elements within ongoing routines and environments. Daily rhythms influence how the brain responds to any chemical change, including those introduced by medication. Sleep patterns, light exposure, movement, and social interaction all shape neurotransmitter activity, sometimes subtly, sometimes noticeably. Antidepressants do not override these rhythms. They operate within them, which is why changes in routine can alter how their effects are felt. Another question often arises here, one that reflects practical curiosity rather than fear. Can antidepressants be seen or measured directly in their effects? Unlike pain relief or sedation, their influence is not immediately visible. Changes appear gradually, often noticed only in hindsight, through shifts in emotional persistence, reactivity, or mental energy. This delayed recognition contributes to confusion about whether they are working at all. Yet this gradual quality is central to how they interact with the brain. Signaling systems adjust slowly, and stability emerges through repetition rather than sudden change. Another myth that persists is the idea that antidepressants suppress sadness entirely. Sadness remains part of human experience. What may change is how long it lingers, how intensely it dominates attention, and how easily it gives way to other states. This distinction matters because it reframes emotional experience as dynamic rather than fixed. Antidepressants do not remove emotional range. They influence its regulation. People also wonder whether taking antidepressants means relying on chemistry instead of personal effort. This framing suggests a separation that does not truly exist. The brain's chemistry is already involved in every effort, decision, and response. Medication interacts with that chemistry, but effort, meaning, and context continue to shape outcomes. Another common concern is whether antidepressants make people emotionally dependent on them. Dependency implies loss of function without a substance. Antidepressants do not remove the brain's capacity to regulate emotion on its own. They interact with signaling pathways temporarily, allowing adjustment and recalibration. Over time, many individuals are able to change or discontinue use as conditions shift. This reflects adaptation rather than reliance. The idea that antidepressants eliminate anxiety completely is another oversimplification. While some reduce anxiety symptoms, they do not remove uncertainty or prevent stressors from appearing. They influence how the nervous system responds, not what life presents. Questions about safety often reappear in long discussions. Are antidepressants dangerous over long periods? Like any medication, they require monitoring and reevaluation. Long-term use is not inherently harmful, but it is not automatic either. It reflects an ongoing assessment of benefit, context, and response. Another misconception suggests that antidepressants work by numbing the brain. Numbness is not their intended mechanism. When emotional blunting occurs, it reflects an imbalance rather than the goal. The primary action is modulation, not suppression. This modulation is subtle enough that it can be difficult to describe, leading to frustration when language falls short. People often ask whether antidepressants influence physical sensations as well as emotions. Neurotransmitters involved in mood also participate in pain perception, appetite, and bodily awareness. Changes in these areas can occur, but again, experiences vary widely. This variability reinforces a central theme. Antidepressants do not produce uniform outcomes. They interact with individual systems shaped by genetics, history, and environment. Another important question concerns identity and agency. Does taking antidepressants mean giving control to medication? Agency does not disappear when chemistry changes. People make decisions, build relationships, and pursue meaning regardless of medication. Antidepressants influence internal conditions, not personal values or choices. As understanding deepens, many of the early fears surrounding antidepressants lose their intensity. They are no longer seen as mysterious forces acting upon the mind, but as tools whose effects depend on context, time, and interaction with living systems. This perspective allows for a more balanced conversation, one that avoids extremes of praise or condemnation. Antidepressants become part of a larger discussion about how humans adapt to stress, recover from imbalance, and seek stability in complex environments. Science continues to refine this understanding, replacing certainty with probability and nuance. New research adds detail rather than finality. And as this ongoing inquiry continues, antidepressants remain one piece of a much larger picture. A picture that includes biology, experience, environment, and the quiet adaptability of the human nervous system as it responds to change over time. Antidepressants begin to appear less as isolated medical objects and more as reflections of how modern societies relate to emotional difficulty and recovery. The questions surrounding them often reveal broader uncertainties about the mind itself. One of these questions asks whether antidepressants represent progress or avoidance. This framing assumes a choice between understanding and intervention, when in reality both develop together. Research into antidepressants has expanded knowledge of brain signaling, emotional regulation, and neuroplasticity, even as it has raised new questions about limits and variability. Another frequent concern is whether antidepressants silence important emotional signals. Emotions evolved to convey information about needs, boundaries, and threats. Antidepressants do not remove this signaling system. Instead, they may reduce the volume of signals that remain stuck in a heightened state, allowing information to pass without overwhelming the system. This difference between signal and saturation is often overlooked. Emotional pain can convey meaning without needing to dominate awareness indefinitely. Antidepressants interact with this balance, not by erasing meaning, but by supporting regulation. Another question that often emerges is whether antidepressants interfere with personal growth. Growth is rarely linear, and emotional struggle is not the only source of insight or change. Learning can occur through stability as well as challenge. Antidepressants do not prevent reflection, learning, or adaptation. They may alter the conditions under which these processes occur, sometimes making them less reactive and more sustainable. The belief that suffering is necessary for depth often complicates conversations about medication. While difficulty can shape understanding, prolonged dysregulation does not automatically produce clarity. Regulation allows perspective, and perspective allows choice. Another myth suggests that antidepressants flatten life into neutrality. Neutrality implies absence, yet many people report that subtle experiences become more noticeable when emotional extremes recede. Quiet satisfaction, mild curiosity, and steady engagement can re-emerge when intensity no longer overwhelms attention. This shift can feel unfamiliar in a culture accustomed to extremes, but unfamiliar does not mean diminished. People also ask whether antidepressants influence moral judgment or values. There is no evidence that they alter ethical reasoning or belief systems. Values are shaped by experience, culture, and reflection, not by neurotransmitter levels alone. What may change is how strongly emotions bias decisions under stress. Reduced emotional pressure can allow values to guide behavior more consistently rather than less. Another area of curiosity concerns the relationship between antidepressants and time. Many people describe changes not in what they feel, but in how long feelings last. Sadness passes more readily, anxiety peaks less sharply, emotional recovery becomes faster. This temporal shift reflects regulation rather than suppression. Antidepressants influence duration and intensity more than content. This distinction helps clarify why experiences differ so widely. Questions about stopping antidepressants often return here, not as fear, but as curiosity about transition. Stopping does not reverse time. The brain does not return to a previous state unchanged. It carries adaptation forward, adjusting again as conditions shift. This ongoing adaptability underscores that antidepressants are not endpoints, but phases within a longer process. People sometimes ask whether taking antidepressants means avoiding responsibility for emotional life. Responsibility implies choice and awareness. Medication does not remove either. People continue to make meaning, seek connection, and respond to circumstances regardless of chemical support. Antidepressants alter internal conditions, not external engagement. Another widespread assumption is that antidepressants reflect a failure of coping. Coping itself relies on biological regulation. When regulation is strained, support can restore capacity rather than replace effort. This reframing reduces stigma without idealizing medication. As conversations mature, antidepressants increasingly occupy a space between extremes, neither miracle solutions nor harmful intrusions, but context-sensitive tools whose effects depend on timing, environment, and individual response. The scientific understanding continues to evolve, guided by ongoing research rather than fixed conclusions. Each study adds detail, sometimes confirming, sometimes revising earlier assumptions. This process mirrors the brain's own adaptability, adjustment, feedback, and refinement over time. And within this evolving landscape, antidepressants remain part of a broader dialogue about how humans respond to emotional strain, recover equilibrium, and sustain engagement with life. Not through certainty or speed, but through gradual shifts that allow regulation to reassert itself quietly, one adjustment at a time. The discussion continues by turning toward one of the quieter questions that often sits beneath all the others: whether antidepressants change the relationship a person has with their own emotions. Emotions arise from complex interactions between perception, memory, bodily state, and expectation. Antidepressants do not interrupt this process at its origin. They influence how strongly certain signals echo through the system and how long those echoes remain active. This means emotions still appear, but they may move through awareness differently, less sticky, less consuming, more able to coexist with other states. This change in flow can be mistaken for loss, when it is often a shift in proportion. Another question that follows naturally is whether antidepressants interfere with intuition. Intuition is not a single signal, but an integration of many inputs. Emotional tone is one of them. When emotional intensity becomes less dominant, intuition does not disappear. It often becomes quieter and more discriminating. Decisions may feel less urgent, but not less informed. This quieter decision-making can feel unfamiliar at first, especially in environments that reward speed and certainty. Yet unfamiliar does not mean impaired. It reflects a nervous system no longer operating under constant pressure. People also wonder whether antidepressants influence empathy or connection. Empathy relies on emotional resonance, but it also relies on regulation. Overwhelming emotion can reduce the capacity to stay present with others. When internal signals are less extreme, attention may become more available. Connection can feel steadier rather than lessened. Again, experiences vary, shaped by individual context rather than a uniform effect. Another recurring myth suggests that antidepressants block access to meaningful sadness. Sadness itself is not removed. What may change is its persistence. Sadness can arise, convey information, and then recede, rather than looping indefinitely. This temporal change often defines the experience more than any change in content. The idea that antidepressants erase emotional authenticity often arises from equating intensity with truth. Yet truth does not require amplification. Subtle emotions can be just as informative. Another topic that surfaces here involves memory. Emotional intensity influences how memories are encoded. When emotional signals are less extreme, memory may feel less vivid for certain experiences while clarity improves for others. This shift reflects balance rather than loss. Attention is no longer monopolized by a single emotional state. People sometimes ask whether antidepressants alter perception of reality. Perception always involves interpretation. Emotional tone colors how situations are experienced. When that tone shifts, perception can feel different, not because reality has changed, but because internal filters have adjusted. This adjustment can make situations feel more manageable without becoming unreal. Another concern relates to motivation over long periods. Some fear that reduced emotional intensity leads to complacency. Yet motivation does not depend solely on intensity. It depends on meaning, consistency, and achievable goals. When emotional overload subsides, sustained motivation can become easier rather than harder, not driven by urgency, but by direction. Questions about physical sensations sometimes reappear. Neurotransmitters involved in mood also interact with appetite, pain perception, and bodily awareness. Changes can occur here, but they are not uniform or guaranteed. Again, Individual response shapes experience. One of the more subtle questions involves time perception. Many people notice not what they feel, but how quickly they recover. Emotional recovery shortens. Transitions between states feel smoother. This reflects regulation rather than suppression. Antidepressants influence how long signals persist, not whether they exist. This distinction helps explain why experiences can feel calmer without feeling empty. Another assumption that often needs gentle correction is the idea that antidepressants represent a final step. They are not endpoints. They are phases within an ongoing process of adaptation. The brain continues learning, adjusting, and reorganizing regardless of medication. Stopping, starting, or changing treatment reflects this adaptability rather than failure. As these layers of understanding accumulate, the narrative around antidepressants becomes less about control and more about cooperation. Cooperation between chemistry, environment, and experience. No single element dominates. Each influences the others quietly over time. And within this cooperative process, the role of antidepressants becomes clearer, not as forces acting upon the mind, but as participants in a system already capable of adjustment, supporting balance when balance has become difficult to maintain on its own, allowing space for regulation to return, gradually, without spectacle, and without the need for simple conclusions. Another layer of the discussion opens when attention turns to why antidepressants evoke such strong reactions in public conversation. Few medical topics are spoken about with as much certainty and contradiction at the same time. Some narratives present them as life-saving necessities, others as symbols of over-medication or avoidance. Both extremes miss the quieter reality in between. Antidepressants sit at the intersection of biology, expectation, culture, and personal experience, and each of these layers influences how they are understood. The brain itself does not experience medication in isolation from belief. Expectation can subtly shape perception of change, not by creating effects out of nothing, but by directing attention towards certain sensations and away from others. This is not deception, but a natural feature of how perception works. The nervous system continuously interprets internal signals through context. Another question often surfaces here. Do antidepressants work because of belief alone? The answer remains grounded in evidence. Antidepressants have measurable biological effects on neurotransmitter systems independent of expectation. At the same time, belief can influence how those effects are experienced and interpreted. This interaction does not negate biology, it accompanies it. Understanding this reduces the urge to frame experiences as either real or imagined. They are often both biological and subjective at once. Another persistent myth suggests that antidepressants represent a failure of society to address deeper causes of distress. While social factors undeniably influence emotional health, this framing assumes a single cause where many exist. Biology, environment, trauma, stress, and meaning interact continuously. Addressing one layer does not deny the importance of others. Antidepressants do not replace social change or personal support. They operate at a different level of the system. Another question that arises concerns control. Some worry that medication removes the ability to feel fully, to respond authentically, to engage deeply with life. Yet control is not something the brain possesses fully even without medication. Emotional responses arise before conscious choice. Regulation determines whether those responses dominate or integrate. Antidepressants influence regulation, not spontaneity. They may reduce emotional flooding, allowing response rather than reaction. This distinction often becomes clearer over time rather than immediately. The idea that antidepressants flatten life into monotony often reflects fear of losing intensity. Intensity, however, is not the same as richness. Emotional richness includes subtlety, contrast, and variation. When extremes recede, quieter states may become more noticeable. Contentment without excitement, focus without urgency, engagement without exhaustion. These states can feel unfamiliar in a culture accustomed to stimulation, yet they reflect balance rather than absence. Another aspect worth considering is how antidepressants interact with stress. Chronic stress alters neurotransmitter signaling over time, often reducing flexibility. Antidepressants may counter some of these changes, not by eliminating stressors, but by supporting the nervous system's capacity to recover. Recovery here means returning to baseline more efficiently after activation. This ability to recover often defines resilience more accurately than resistance. Questions about long-term emotional development sometimes arise alongside this. Will emotional skills stagnate if medication is involved? Emotional learning does not stop when chemistry changes. Reflection, insight, and adaptation continue. In fact, when emotional overload decreases, reflection can become easier rather than harder. Perspective widens when urgency diminishes. Another frequently voiced concern is whether antidepressants are prescribed too quickly. This question belongs as much to healthcare systems as to pharmacology itself. Prescribing practices vary widely across regions and contexts. Medication is one option among many, not an inevitable outcome. Recognizing this helps separate the substance itself from the systems that deliver it. The medication does not carry intention, systems do. Another question emerges around comparison. Are newer antidepressants better than older ones? This assumes progress always moves in a straight line. Newer medications may have different side effect profiles or mechanisms, but effectiveness remains individual. What matters most is not novelty, but fit. Fit depends on biology, tolerance, and context. One size does not apply. This individuality often frustrates those seeking certainty, yet it reflects the complexity of the brain rather than a lack of knowledge. Research continues to refine understanding, not to finalize it. Each generation of studies adds detail, sometimes challenging assumptions, sometimes reinforcing them. This process mirrors emotional regulation itself, adjustment through feedback rather than final answers. And as these considerations accumulate, the role of antidepressants becomes less dramatic and more realistic. They are not statements about identity or morality. They are interactions with living systems that respond differently under different conditions. Seeing them this way allows the conversation to soften, less polarized, more attentive, creating space for understanding without requiring agreement. The narrative continues by turning toward how uncertainty itself shapes the conversation around antidepressants. Uncertainty often invites simplification, and simplification can harden into belief. Yet the brain rarely operates in absolutes. Antidepressants exist in a space where outcomes are probabilistic rather than guaranteed, shaped by timing, context, and individual sensitivity. This probabilistic nature explains why certainty feels appealing but rarely accurate. Another question often arises here. If antidepressants are imperfect, why use them at all? This question assumes that usefulness requires perfection. In biology, usefulness usually means shifting conditions enough to allow other systems to function again. Antidepressants are not expected to solve complexity, only to influence it gently. Another common assumption is that antidepressants override natural emotional processes. Yet natural emotional processes themselves rely on chemical signaling. Neurotransmitters are not artificial additions to experience. They are the medium through which experience occurs. Antidepressants interact with this medium, adjusting flow rather than replacing content. People also ask whether antidepressants dull the ability to feel joy. Joy does not disappear when regulation improves. What may change is the contrast between emotional states. Intense swings soften, making joy feel steadier rather than explosive. This steadiness can feel unfamiliar, especially if intensity was previously mistaken for vitality. Another area of curiosity involves effort. Some wonder whether antidepressants reduce the need for personal work. Effort remains essential to living. Medication does not remove the need for decision-making, boundaries, or reflection. It influences internal conditions under which effort is applied. Effort without regulation can exhaust. Regulation without effort can stagnate. Balance emerges between the two. Another myth that persists is that antidepressants are chemical shortcuts to avoidance. Avoidance implies turning away from experience. Regulation allows engagement without overwhelm. When emotional signals are less consuming, it becomes easier to face complexity rather than escape it. This distinction matters because it reframes medication not as avoidance, but as support for engagement. Questions about emotional honesty sometimes surface here. Does medication make feelings less real? Feelings are not made real by intensity alone. They are real by virtue of arising. Antidepressants do not fabricate emotions, nor do they erase them. They influence duration, amplitude, and persistence. Honesty remains intact. Expression may change, but experience continues. Another aspect worth noting is how antidepressants interact with memory and learning. Emotional intensity influences memory consolidation. When emotional pressure decreases, memory encoding can become more selective. Fewer experiences dominate recall, allowing a wider range of information to be retained. This can feel like clarity rather than dulling. Yet again, experience varies. No single description captures all responses. People also question whether antidepressants limit spontaneity. Spontaneity depends on flexibility, not chaos. When emotional reactivity decreases, responses can become less impulsive and more deliberate. This does not eliminate spontaneity, it changes its form. Another frequent concern relates to physical sensations. Neurotransmitters involved in mood also participate in appetite, pain perception, and bodily awareness. Changes can occur, but they do not follow a uniform pattern. The nervous system integrates many signals at once, and altering one pathway influences others subtly. This interconnectedness explains why experiences resist simple prediction. Another assumption worth addressing is that antidepressants represent a permanent label. Labels belong to language, not biology. Taking medication does not define identity or future trajectory. The brain continues adapting regardless of labels. Phases come and go, conditions shift, and responses evolve. Antidepressants are part of this fluid process, not markers of finality. As these perspectives accumulate, the tone of the discussion shifts again, away from argument and toward observation. Observation allows patterns to emerge without forcing interpretation. Patterns show that antidepressants tend to influence regulation more than content, duration more than meaning, intensity more than authenticity. They operate slowly, quietly, and unevenly, because the systems they interact with are complex and alive. How language itself shapes the experience of antidepressants. Words like treatment, disorder, imbalance, or recovery can quietly frame expectations long before any direct experience occurs. The brain responds not only to chemistry, but to meaning, and meaning is often carried through language. When antidepressants are described in rigid or absolute terms, they can feel heavier than they are. When described as adjustable tools within a larger system, they tend to be perceived with less tension. This difference does not change the chemistry, but it changes how change is interpreted. Another question that often surfaces at this point is whether antidepressants imply something is fundamentally broken. The brain, however, is not a machine with fixed parts that fail once and never recover. It is a living system designed to adapt, sometimes imperfectly, to prolonged stress or disruption. Antidepressants do not label a system as broken. They interact with a system that has adapted in ways that may no longer be helpful. Adaptation itself is neutral. It reflects survival, not failure. Another common concern involves comparison. People often compare their experience to others, wondering why responses differ so widely. Comparison assumes uniformity where none exists. Emotional regulation is influenced by genetics, developmental history, stress exposure, sleep, and countless subtle factors. Antidepressants interact with this entire landscape, not with a single variable. Expecting identical outcomes overlooks the individuality of nervous systems. Another recurring myth is that antidepressants block emotional growth. Growth is often associated with struggle, but growth also requires periods of stability. Regulation creates the conditions under which insight can be integrated rather than overwhelming. Antidepressants do not prevent reflection or learning. They may make reflection less reactive and more sustainable. Another question arises about the sense of self over time. Some people describe feeling different while on medication and wonder which version is more real. Identity is not a static state. It shifts with mood, context, age, and experience. Antidepressants may alter one set of conditions within which identity expresses itself, but they do not create or erase the self. They influence state, not essence. Questions about emotional honesty sometimes return here. Is it honest to feel differently with medication? Honesty is not defined by intensity, but by congruence. When internal signals are less overwhelming, responses can align more closely with values rather than impulses. This alignment can feel more authentic, not less. Another area worth attention is how antidepressants relate to time and patience. Because they work gradually, they resist the cultural expectation of immediate results. This slowness can feel frustrating, yet it mirrors the pace at which the brain naturally adapts. Rapid shifts are rare in healthy systems. Stability emerges through repetition and feedback. Another question involves whether antidepressants narrow emotional range permanently. Current understanding suggests they do not. Emotional range can change during use and readjust afterward. The brain retains its capacity for variation. What changes is often the threshold at which certain states dominate. This threshold is adjustable, not fixed. People also wonder whether antidepressants influence how the future is imagined. Expectation and hope are shaped by emotional tone. When persistent negative signaling eases, the future may feel less constrained. Not because optimism is forced, but because prediction becomes less biased toward threat. This shift reflects regulation rather than illusion. Another concern is whether antidepressants interfere with memory of difficult experiences. Memory remains, but its emotional charge may soften. This softening does not erase learning. It allows memory to exist without constant reactivation. Another subtle question involves agency. Does medication act instead of choice? Choice remains central to life regardless of internal state. Medication alters conditions under which choices are made, not the capacity to choose. This distinction clarifies why antidepressants neither guarantee change nor prevent it. They influence readiness, not direction. As these reflections accumulate, antidepressants become easier to place within a broader framework of adaptation. They are not endpoints, identities, or declarations. They are interactions with systems that respond continuously to environment and meaning. Understanding them requires tolerance for ambiguity, because ambiguity is where living systems operate. And within that ambiguity, conversation can remain open, flexible, and responsive, allowing new questions to emerge without urgency to resolve them, allowing understanding to deepen through attention rather than certainty. As the story continues toward its final stretch, what remains is not a conclusion, but a clearer sense of proportion. Antidepressants matter, but they are not everything. They influence regulation, but they do not define experience. They participate quietly in the ongoing process of how humans adapt, recalibrate, and continue forward through changing emotional landscapes, without spectacle, without final answers, simply as one element within a much larger, evolving system. The final stretch of this story does not aim to summarize or conclude, but to place antidepressants gently back into the larger flow of human experience. When all the questions, concerns, myths, and explanations settle, what remains is a clearer sense of scale. Antidepressants are significant yet limited, influential yet not defining. They affect regulation, not identity. They shape conditions, not meaning. This perspective matters because it allows room for both caution and openness without tension. The brain is not a static object waiting to be fixed, but a responsive system shaped by time, environment, memory, and expectation. Antidepressants interact with this system in the same way many influences do, gradually, unevenly, without guarantees. Another quiet realization emerges here. Much of the fear surrounding antidepressants comes from the desire for certainty about causes, outcomes, and permanence. Yet emotional life has never operated with certainty. Moods shift, motivation changes, perception evolves. Antidepressants do not interrupt this fluidity. They participate in it, sometimes smoothing extremes, sometimes revealing subtleties, sometimes doing very little at all. And this variability is not a failure of science, but a reflection of biological diversity. One of the most important understandings to emerge from decades of research is that antidepressants are not moral statements. They do not represent strength or weakness, success or failure. They are responses to specific conditions at specific times. Those conditions can change, and when they do, the role of medication can change as well. Another layer of clarity comes from recognizing that emotional regulation is not about constant positivity. It is about flexibility, the ability to respond, recover, and adapt. Antidepressants may support this flexibility when it has become difficult to maintain, not by eliminating emotion, but by allowing movement between states to occur with less resistance. This movement is subtle, often noticed only after time has passed, when reactions feel less fixed, when recovery feels less effortful, when perspective widens without being forced. Language sometimes struggles to capture this shift, because it is more about absence of strain than presence of change. And yet, this absence matters. It allows other aspects of life to come forward: attention, connection, routine, meaning. Antidepressants do not create these experiences. They may simply stop them from being constantly overshadowed. As this understanding settles, there is no need to hold on to a single narrative about what antidepressants are supposed to mean. Their meaning is contextual, temporary, and personal, shaped by biology and circumstance rather than ideology. The conversation around them continues to evolve, just as scientific understanding continues to refine itself. Questions will remain, not because answers are missing, but because complexity does not resolve into simplicity, and that is acceptable. Within this acceptance, antidepressants find their place, not as endpoints, not as solutions, not as threats, but as one of many ways humans interact with their own adaptability, quietly, cautiously, and with increasing nuance over